Hi, welcome everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to have you all here. My name is Priya Natarajan, and I'm a theoretical astrophysicist, and I'm the new director of the Franke program in the Science and Humanities at Yale. This is the first event that we've put together for this academic year, so I'm thrilled to have benefactors, Barbara and Richard Franke here. Thank you so much for coming to this event. And I want to start off by saying what a delight it is to have the opportunity to hear from Alyson Shotz today. So Alyson was a visiting fellow, an artist in residence at Yale, the Bob Doran Artist in Residence in 2008. And so it was at that time that both John Wetlaufer, who is in the Department of Geology and Geophysics, and I had the good fortune of running into her. Actually, she came out seeking us to recount facts correctly. And I was amazed at her artistic sensibility and the combination of curiosity in the very scientific sense as we define it. So her work really represents, in a way, the bridge between the so-called two cultures. One of the most apt ways to start the first series of Franke programming for this year. And her work has been shown widely. She's extremely well regarded. She lives and works out of Brooklyn, New York. And I think what's super exciting is that she is going to be included in a new exhibition called Art and Space at the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao, and was recently included in the exhibitions The More Things Change at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, Contemplating the Void. I'm reading out the names of many of the exhibitions to show you how, when you see her work and her talking about her work, you will see how she really is quite informed by her deep interest in the notions of space, geometry, and abstraction. So she's had solo exhibitions in all kinds of exciting venues like the Sculpture Center in Dallas, Texas, the Indianapolis Museum of Art, the Wexner Center for Arts in Columbus, Ohio, and the Espace Louis Vuitton in Tokyo, amongst other places. She's, of course, also been exhibited at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in New York, Light and Landscape at the Storm King Art Center. And her works have been included now in many public collections, including at the Guggenheim in New York, the Hirshhorn Museum in DC, the Whitney Museum of American Art, the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art, amongst other places. So I'm thrilled to have Alyson here today, and without much further ado, I would turn over to her and look forward to learning a lot more about the lens with which you see both the world and your work. Thank you so much for coming, Alyson.
Thank you, Priya. It's really great to be back here at Yale. And I have to find my pocket. Okay, here it is.
Yes, before we start, I forgot to mention we have a reception following the talk in room 108. That's just right downstairs.
So thank you for inviting me. It's really kind of almost weirdly nostalgic to be back here and seeing these old Yale buildings, which are so beautiful. My work kind of truly began in 1994 with a question about space. Wondering what is space, what is it made of, how does it shape everything that we see around us. That interest began really in art school, but sort of surfaced in this work here. But also, I would just also want to say that, then through Priya and through other reading other things in physics, I learned that space is very elusive, and we still don't totally know what it is, I think. So that's kind of interesting because that became my obsession. I'm also interested, so I'm interested in visualizing space and also interested in visualizing gravity and thinking about light. So those three things are the main, almost like materials of my work. So if you think about normal materials of art being like paint and paper, I like to think of my materials being gravity, space, and light. This work is called Reflective Mimicry, and this is really, I guess this must be 1994. I'm really bad with the dates. I will not be going chronologically also in this talk, but this is early, and I like to kind of sometimes show this first because this is the thing. So I had been thinking about just the boundary between myself and space, and I wanted to dissolve that boundary. And so I made this suit that is made of mirrors. And this became a project in photography and video. I won't be showing the video today, though, just because it's too long. But through this, I was trying to kind of think about the idea of solidity and what is solid and what is space, and why do we even think of some things as solid? Of course, they feel solid to us, but they really have space in them, which I find hard to conceive. So when I made this piece, I also realized it was sort of dealing with space in an interesting way visually. So things that were solid were appearing to be not solid in the photograph, at least. Then I also made this kind of like further extension. I thought, well, the body is there, but then it's not really extending out enough. So I made this back piece, and there were actually hand pieces also that came off my fingers. And for some reason, I didn't include those in the photo. But that sort of like extended the boundary further. And then I made some videos with this, with a dancer. I don't know why I didn't include that, but anyway. This is skipping much ahead, somewhere around 2003. I don't know what just fell. This is called Mirror Fence. This is a permanent piece at Storm King Sculpture Center. So this is up now, although I'm not sure if Storm King is open, but it's up anytime you go. In this work, it's a fence, and it's 140 feet long. It's made of glass. And here I was trying to make the space and the solid stuff sort of equalized. And what ended up happening was that because those intervals are kind of equal, your eye doesn't know what's solid and what's space, and so when you walk by it, it just kind of seems to flicker. And it becomes almost, in a way, digital, like a digital effect. And again, the boundary is sort of being dissolved. Another thing that's important in my work is that it changes. I wanted to, I thought about change a lot, and I think when I was first working, and I never would create a rule for myself, and never would I say like no mechanical things in my work, but so far, I don't want to have mechanical change just because I always think, well, that's going to break, and then I'll have to fix it, and that will be a pain. So I wanted to incorporate change, but I wanted it to be natural change. And this work, because it's reflecting its surroundings, and just part of its surroundings, obviously it's changing with the seasons and with the time of day, or, a cloud passes and that changes it. This is it in snow. And actually, I need to get a better picture of it in snow because it really kind of almost disappears. And then you could kind of just see like the shadows. This is called Break Line. This is very new. And so for years, I was thinking, wow, I really like Mirror Fence, and how can I continue that but make it, change it in some way? And I wanted to make a kind of like a curvy fence. But it's interesting, just on I don't know if this is a scientifically related note or not, but I think you can have an idea, and then that idea can just take a really long time to come to fruition and to find its right avenue. So I was trying to sort of like draw the curve. I was thinking of modeling it in the computer. And finally, when I got the opportunity to make this piece, I brought out, it's based on one of those snow fences that you see like on beaches or in snow. And we took an actual wooden snow fence out on the property and just let it kind of physically react to the topography underneath and to its own materiality. So it's connected, it's like wood pieces connected by wires. And so we set it up and it sort of flopped this way and flopped that way. And then we just recorded each picket and like where it was falling, and that's how the shape was determined. So it's really responding to gravity, and that's something that's really important in my work. I'm really interested in gravity, and I just find it really beautiful in a way, like the shapes that gravity create. You know, these things are not something I created, and oftentimes and even in using reflection in my work, it's because I don't want to create the color. I sort of want it to be created by nature, by somebody, not somebody else, but just the physics of the environment around us. So I'm really interested. That's just showing the change at night. At night, I really like it. This is a video in which the sound, I guess, doesn't work, but and now I have to. It's pretty short. But movement, you can see also that it becomes like visible and invisible depending on what the sun is doing, depending on your angle in relationship to it. Some fancy drone footage. Okay, this is the poster image. This is called Scattering Screen. This is also relatively new, actually. I was thinking about, I do a lot of large-scale sculpture and outdoor sculpture, and I'm always thinking about outdoor sculpture that I've seen in the past and how I want to respond to that. And I wanted to make a large-scale metal sculpture that wasn't like a typical large-scale metal sculpture that's like a solid kind of chunk that's painted. So this is lots of little circles, and obviously it relates very much to that first image that we saw, reflective mimicry. It's lots of little steel circles that are kind of almost sewn together just with wires. So it's wired together, but it's quite sturdy. And it's not hanging from the trees. That's everybody thinks it is, but I think that that's not safe for the tree. But it's supported from the back. With this sculpture, I was thinking almost about like showing the air, just making the air and the sculpture equal. So it's a sort of similar idea in a way to reflective mimicry, but yet it's more of a space or an environment to be in versus a body. This is the piece that was at the Guggenheim, New York. It's called The Shape of Space. And that did sort of define this lecture as well. That name defined the lecture. Oh no, I guess it was done earlier than my residency at Yale, but I was reading about space and the possible 11 dimensions of space, and it was such an interesting idea, and it was really new at that time, and I have no idea what the status is right now. I'm looking at Priya. It's probably over by now. But in any case, at that time, that was the current thinking, is that there were 11 dimensions of space, and I was like, oh my God, what does that look like? How can I picture that? And there were these things called Calabi-Yau shapes, which actually became kind of influential to me in thinking about folded space. So this is made out of lenses. It's made out of clear plastic lenses, but they're the kind of thing that you use like to read the newspaper. If you're having a hard time reading the newspaper, they're very flexible plastic lenses. They're not thick. They're like 2 pieces of paper thick. And they're stapled together just with stainless steel staples. and they're hand cut. So another thing that's important in my work is that though it's sort of massive, there's like a humanity, like a human scale to it. And I felt like, you know, maybe I could have gotten those lenses cut. I'm not sure how. Laser cut wouldn't work, but let's say there was some way of doing it, but I really wanted them to be hand cut so that there was like a humanity to it. And the other thing is this piece also, I don't know if I have, that's another. I don't think I have pictures of this through time, but it also changes dramatically as the sun changes. Another thing I probably should say is that I've always been a little bit interested in optics. So I guess that's another sort of scientific connection. I've always loved lenses and looking through microscopes and looking through telescopes. And just something the way that you see differently through those things is really interesting to me. And then even I did a glass residency and even learned how to make lenses at one time, although it was quite the long process. This is called Geometry of Light, I believe. This is in Tokyo. I'll just skip ahead. And Espace Louis Vuitton. These are lenses also, but sort of arranged differently. This is kind of not the whole show, but you're seeing part of the whole show. It's a light-filled space, and so it really worked beautifully with my work. And maybe it was the first time that I got to see indoor work in a space where light could really interact with it. And I was thinking of this as kind of light, you know, as a particle and a wave, and how I would picture that. I forgot to say that in The Shape of Space, I was trying to picture these 11 dimensions of space, and though I knew that that sculpture was nothing like 11 dimensions of space, it was kind of like my attempt to picture that. I didn't really care that it's not a, you know, scientific depiction. It's my imagining of it. And within that sculpture, there were these, because they're lenses, if you got into a curve, images were sort of projected outwards. And so there was this kind of strange dimensionality that happened. This one, I was thinking of light as a particle and a wave, and thinking of light almost stopped in time and what it might look like. And so these are lenses sort of strung along a wire with beads in between. Oh, I guess I can look here. It also became something like a cloud, and like each lens kind of like a drop of water. You know, part of what I'm interested in is having my work be like a atmospheric thing. Not always, but sometimes. So something you can kind of be inside, like a weather event or something, and then something that's just changing. And apparently in Tokyo, and I guess they're different than here, and maybe they have a bigger attention span, longer attention span. But apparently people were setting up, they had these little cushions, and people would set up cushions and watch the sculpture for hours. And they'd come back, you know, on multiple days, which was so wonderful because that's what I really would like people to do. And this is, you can start to see the light changing here. And these are, again, like hand-cut lenses, hand beaded. There's a lot of handwork typically in my, you can see it's in Japan. As you can see how it changes somewhat through the, oh, I also have this video. This is a short time lapse. The other thing, I mean, now that I see that, I'm reminded also that it became a kind of clock because the shadows were obviously moving across that white floor. And, you know, every day the shadow would change, of course, with the changing angle of the sun and the season. And I went back in, I think I installed it in September maybe, or August, and then I went back in December. It was a completely different experience. The shadows were way longer. And I started to think of it almost like a sundial or something, or just a way to perceive the movement of the Earth around the sun, you know, or just to make people more aware of that. This is called Invariant Interval, and I look questioningly at Priya for that. It was some of my, it's very difficult to title artworks, but I'll just talk about what the work is about, because I'm not sure that it's totally appropriately titled. But I was thinking about, this is about 25 feet high, and I don't remember the width, but I do remember the height. It is made of glass beads and wire, so the whole thing is sort of hand beaded. And the idea was to make something, a lot of my work kind of starts at it becomes small and expands out, but this is like one where I really intentionally wanted to deal with that idea of like expansion of space. So when this sculpture is deinstalled, it's just flat and tiny, really. And then it expands up into this shape, and it really could have even kept going, honestly. Like if the ceiling was higher, we could have gone higher. So it's sort of showing, again, like a way to show space. And I feel like the inside of this is just space showing itself. You know, it may be hard to see that this is like, I do have a video for this. And I think it kind of flattens out, but it's so dematerialized, and I'm really interested in showing volume without mass also. So this is a really good example of that. Let's see if there's, you can kind of see it there. So basically, as I bring the sculpture up, it kind of starts to shape itself. And I try to let things happen, as you can tell from some of the previous work, just let the gravity and the materiality of the thing work together to create the shape. So I try to guide it a little bit, but not too much. Because I feel like, you know, I'm really interested in seeing like what does that do? And this is at the Brooklyn Museum in New York. And this one really reacts to light because those beads are, they're like a silvered glass. And so as the sun changes, actually at the Brooklyn Museum, it became almost electrified with the sun. It was surprising to me. Oh, I found, this was in the New York Times, so I'm sure people saw this, but this was a gravitational wave animation that they just published with the new thing. Discovery of gravitational waves at LIGO. And I was like, oh my God, that looks like my sculpture. I mean, it kind of blew me away, because the other thing about that sculpture, I think, well, here's one. This is a sideways orientation of a different one. If you touch just part of that sculpture, the whole sculpture reacts. So it's really acting like that animation. And so it does lead me to think, I mean, in my more positive days, you know, maybe I'm onto something. Like, I think that maybe by, you know, just doing this kind of experimentation, like physical experimentation, well, you certainly see things about the world. I mean, that's for sure. So they're not scientific, but they're observations of one kind or another. And for me, they help me understand more about the physical world. That's just another view of it. Oh, this is a video that maybe shows a little more three-dimensionally. I think I'm talking in this. I'm not sure, I can't remember. Small into something very large. So I wanted to make a sculpture that did that, and I had been working with different methods of, you know, making that happen, and finally I hit upon the correct method after a long period of experimentation. Yeah, I was very interested in creating, you know, a large volume without a lot of mass. That's something that's a constant in my work. In terms of the light, I'm interested in having it be present and not completely present at the same time, or having it shift in time. So depending on your angle or your relationship to this work, it becomes invisible in some places, and some places it's very apparent. And with the natural light from the Wellen Museum, with this window, this great window here, in the morning it looks completely different than it does later in the afternoon. The natural light on it changes it dramatically, and I love the natural light on it. So yeah, depending on what time of day you see the sculpture, you may be seeing it differently. So that was from a show at the Wellen Museum at Hamilton College. And I was reminded by myself of that idea also, that I forgot about that sculpture does really sort of disappear at times, or part of it'll disappear, part of it will be apparent, so it's kind of like, it looks like partial sculpture, and how is the rest of it, what's happening over there? And that's kind of an interesting thing. This is the piece that's owned by SF MoMA. It's called The Structure of Light. This is an earlier piece. And I remember at this time I was thinking of defining space just almost through lines or through drawing. So also using the beads, but thinking of almost like these kind of like layers of space that you could walk through. These, I don't know if you can see this picture really, but I also make these thread drawings that are thread, and you can see this better maybe here. They're thread or yarn on pins on a wall. So that one was maybe like 50 feet long. I don't remember actually. But let's see. So I start with making a shape in the computer. It's kind of, this is another thing that I feel, deals with dimensionality to me. So I'm working with a virtual shape in the computer, and then this is the one at the Wellen. They're very hard to, these are the white on white ones, so they are a little bit hard to see, but I have some better pictures coming up. I take a virtual shape and I animate it. So I create a little world for it, and I create a little gravity space for it, and maybe wind or maybe no wind or whatever. And then I let the shape fall down. Many times it's just a plane. I'm usually dealing with like a flat plane and having it fall through space, but sometimes it could be a tube or something just very basic. And then I stop it in the computer and photograph it, which I also find to be kind of funny because it's like, it's not really a photograph, but it's this virtual photograph and from many different angles. And then I take that, and that becomes a template by which I make these drawings. And so these drawings are on the wall, but they're not flat on the wall. They're about 2 inches off the wall. And they look dimensional, but they're flat, but they're not flat. And they also have shadows. The yarn makes a shadow behind it, which is like a drawing line, which actually was the original intention of the whole thing to begin with, was that I didn't really want to draw. And I was like trying to find a way around drawing. So I thought, well, I'll let the shadow do the drawing for me. So anyway, so they have this weird kind of like, they're not this and they're not that. They could even almost be called sculpture in a sense, but they're kind of drawing. So I like that in-betweenness of them. Let's see. Yeah, sort of existing between 2 and 3 dimensions. That's more of a close-up. This is an example of a show I had at Derek Eller Gallery. And these were called time-lapse, and I had done a research fellowship at Stanford, and I ended up doing a lot of looking at Edward Muybridge, and I just fell in love again with those photos. We all do, but I saw more there because he was there, And I guess Leland Stanford paid for him to do that stuff. So there was a huge collection there. And I was thinking about this idea of time lapse, and I think about that anyway just in terms of progression or change. And Muybridge was dealing with time through photography, or allowed us to see time differently through photography. And I was thinking, well, you know, I don't know that I thought about this exactly this way at the time, but now I think of it as, you know, this is like almost like a virtual, like we're living in this virtual time, and so this is this virtual animation and virtual space, and it's not really real. And this is like seeing time through that technology. Well, I like to think of it that way. And so this is the same, you can see it's the same shape sort of progressing through space and time. And then, so it's the idea of like this virtual space, but then it's being translated into this very human, like threading process, which is very slow. And these are just each one. I can't tell if that's clear or not. These are some black ones that I personally really like, although again, I can't tell if that's clear. And the black ones I really think of as space. And I'm actually doing some sculptures now that are, I just realized, kind of related to this because they're black. And I think of them as almost like, not black holes necessarily, but like black space sucking up the space around it. So maybe it is like a black hole in a way, but it's not supposed to represent that. This was a very like old piece and sort of related to like my research into space at that time, because I think I probably kept asking Priya, what is the shape of space? What is the actual shape of our universe? And I guess there were, at that time, you know, it was maybe a sphere, maybe a flat plane, or maybe a hyperbolic plane. And I found this way of folding a hyperbolic plane out of paper. And I said, oh, I'm just gonna like represent all of space that way. And I did a lot of, it must have been when I was here, because I remember talking to the astronomy people and getting maps, star maps, and I was just gonna do like all of the sky like this. And I didn't realize what a crazy notion that was, because it's very time consuming, folding all that paper. So then I think I started to do that, and I changed my mind. And eventually I was looking at my rug, and I thought, well, that would be interesting to show something really that we can understand, like a rug, and change it into a hyperbolic plane. So it's not exactly hyperbolic, but they're all made of hyperbolic planes. And so that's my living room rug, just photographed, you know, piece by piece, and then folded up into this hyperbolic shape. That's the detail. And these are more sort of hyperbolic, they're hyperbolic paraboloids. And I'm not going to go too far into it. Those is a shape that Eric Demain at MIT made popular. I don't know if he invented that shape or not. But those are landscapes folded. This is a print group that I made. And so I should also say that my interest in space, as I sort of said before, led to an interest in folding. And like a continued interest in folding. And folding just seems like such a simple thing, but yet it's like seems so, there's something very resonant about it, and it contains all this sort of potential energy, and maybe that's why I like it. You know, I don't know, but I can't seem to just stop dealing with folding. And I guess those Calabi-Yau shapes, which are like folded spaces, you know, maybe led to that. And then I started reading about topology also. Anyway, this is a thing I did with Crown Point Press in San Francisco, and this is just a progression of folded paper shapes. So it's the same piece of paper, just progressively folded more and more, and we inked the paper, and we put it down and run the print, and put a new color on, run the print, and so you see like each color. I'm just wondering if I can walk here. You know, this pink, which was on the front side here when we inked it, then becomes here when I fold it some more, and so it just progresses forward like that. And this is another group we did just with more transparency instead of color. Then I began to think, I really, I don't know, the folding is very intentional, and I don't like, as you may know by now after this talk, I don't like to intentionally do anything. And in fact, the woman who runs that print shop, who's a really famous woman in the print world, Catherine Brown, she wanted me to use color, and I was like, oh no. Yeah, how am I going to choose a color? Because I really can't figure out why to choose a color. But in any case, so then I thought, okay, this folding is a little too intentional, and I'm not sure why I'm folding it this way or that way. So I came up with the idea, sort of an obvious progression to do crumpling, which is a type of folding which is more chaotic and random, and I really like that. And actually, there's a million ways you can crumple as well, as you can kind of see here. So these are, it's hard to tell in these photos probably, but they're made by taking a piece of paper that large, crumpling it, photographing it like precisely in a grid, putting that photograph back together, printing out a white piece of paper. So now I've got a printed image of the crumples, and then I recrumple it again. So it's got like printed and real. So it's got this sort of optical thing going on where, some you think are physical, but they're not, and some are printed. So it's this doubling. And I guess that idea of illusion is, is resonant to me. I don't like to get too far down that road, but this was just a little group of folded paper pieces I made for a place called Dieudonné. They asked me again to do a drawing, and I freaked out. Oh no. I don't draw. I kind of draw, but I really don't draw very much, and the way that I make my sculptures, it's a trial and error process. And somebody once compared it to like empirical research, which is like trying this, trying that. And once in a while I'll make a drawing, but not really. Anyway, so then I figured out, I can make these folded things and I can get out of the whole drawing thing. And then that led to these, and these are folded aluminum. So I really liked those, and I thought, well, paper sculpture is very difficult. I had learned that through the living room rug project. And what can I make these out of that would be more long-lasting? And I found, just aluminum that's somewhat foldable. And they're black because of the same idea of just like folded space, really. And it's funny because these aren't that old actually, but they're maybe a couple of years old. But now this is what I'm doing right now, but in a different way. But yeah, I found them, really. I like to think that that's like what space looks like, just these kind of folds of blackness. This is something I started working in clay, I don't know, maybe 6-7 years ago. And I was trying at this time to do folding in clay, and this is what resulted. So they weren't really folded, they were kind of flopped. And, it was okay. I was like, well, there's something nice there. And I like the folds. And then I tried to figure out, like, how can I do that more in a way that is something that works with my work. And so these are and I don't even know what happened, and this is one of those like great moments in work where you just like you just say, well, I'm just going to do this thing because I'm desperate. So I had my slab of clay and I rolled it around a cardboard tube and just dropped it either on the ground or on the table. It was a small one, like probably this big. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is so amazing. Like the wrinkles that are caused by that dropping, by the force. And then it became a huge, like 2-year or something odyssey to get these. It really was not easy because these are porcelain, and porcelain's very delicate. And it's just, I didn't realize. So you can do that and it looks really fantastic, but then immediately it wants to crack, it wants to like change, and then as it dries it wants to crack, and it's like, ah. So I'd have to babysit these, every day, like tending to them so that they kept their form. And actually, it was just a really long process to figure out how to preserve that moment. And so really these are, I was going to talk about, I titled these recumbent folds, but let me keep going. They're based in a certain way on Newton's laws of motion, like number 2 in a way, and kind of maybe number 3. But force equals mass times acceleration. But then also that other one about the body exerting the same force as the other body or whatever. What is it? When one body exerts a force on the second body exerts a force equal in magnitude in opposite direction to the first body. So these are made again now these became much bigger. So then the porcelain was like this. My slab was huge and was this high when I rolled it. And I had to have an assistant, then it became really heavy, and we would drop that down. And so the force plus the materiality of the clay plus the humidity of the room and the day and all these things like interact to create like this moment. And that's what I found really fascinating, that I really couldn't control it. There were like little things I could kind of control, like the force at which I dropped them, the height. But really this is kind of like nature or, physics doing its thing through art, I guess. And this is an example of some thread drawings I made based on that. And actually these are, so this is like the virtual version of that. So then I made a tube and had it like drop in virtual space, and made some thread drawings based on that. And these are called laws of motion. Really, the other ones could have been called that too, but I think I just didn't come up with that title in time. Titling can be really a nightmare. Oh yeah, so the difference, so these are the same idea, but in bronze. And these are also unique, so they're not editioned, and like a lot of bronzes are editioned, but these are not. So they're one-time burnouts. And the interesting thing I think about these is that if you think about the history of bronze sculpture, it's usually, of course right now we're all very aware of this, but used to make monuments. And I kind of think of these as like monuments to like this moment in time, or this like one, interaction that happened. And then it's preserved, I don't know about forever, but for a long time, probably in bronze. So it's like a little monument. This is a recent sculpture called Object for Reflection. I just had a show of this at Derek Eller Gallery. And this is another piece in which I'm just trying to think about large-scale metal sculpture in a new way. So kind of related to that it's not early, but I showed it early in the slideshow. So this is lots of little aluminum pieces connected with steel rings. And so instead of metal being this kind of rigid material, it becomes like almost like a fabric, or like a material that reacts to gravity, which is important to me. And also these are, they're really planes again. They're flat planes when they begin, but then when they get supported and start interacting with the space and the gravity, then they form their own shapes and become not flat. And it interacts with light. I mean, since that Louis Vuitton show, I really like to have a lot of natural light, and we really didn't have any fake light. So it was just changing all the time, and I think in this slide you can see that it's transparent, really. So depending on the light, it's transparent or solid, so it kind of keeps shifting its physicality. Let's see if there's anything else to say about that. Yeah, and really thinking about, I'm really interested in redefining large-scale sculpture, metal sculpture, or just sculpture in general, thinking about it in different ways. oh, here you can see how it's made, kind of. So this, I don't know if you'd say sadly or crazily or whatever, but this was all just put together by hand. So all those little circles are folded, but I have a bunch of assistants, and that's how that happened. These are called transitional objects, and I talked earlier about the idea of color and not wanting to choose a color. So I started using a while ago, many years ago, I started using this dichroic film, which is clear but has a kind of nanostructure on it that reflects the light one way or another way depending on your angle, angle of the sun or whatever. So it's like vaporized metals either onto glass or onto a film or whatever it is. So it's like a real structure, and it's like the structure of a butterfly's wing in a way. It has that same kind of, like, that's how the color of a butterfly's wing is created versus like a pigment. And so what I like about it is that, as the light changes, it changes. And this was shown at Storm King also, and we just had natural light in there, and the sculptures just changed constantly. And then I don't have to choose the color. I like that. And this is a piece at Stanford University. It's a permanent sculpture commission at the Li Ka-shing Center for Learning and Knowledge. And so this is made with that same material. And actually I showed them those smaller sculptures. Oh, and you can see here, like this front sculpture, if you look at that green one, that yellow one is the same piece. It's just like a different time of day or whatever it is. But when they asked me to do the commission, I showed them the smaller ones that I just showed you and said, yeah, I really want to make that big. And they got enthusiastic about it and went for it. So that was really fantastic. Oh, and this is called Threefold, and it has this sort of topology reference in a way that it's like this same shape twisted and folded 3 different ways. And through this, you can kind of see the scale just by seeing a person next to it. What was I going to say? Oh, yeah, so during the process of this, I met a professor there. They do a lot of stuff with proteins in that department. And she was talking about proteins and how they act and how they're non-dimensional. And when they become folded, they become dimensional and active, and they do their work as a protein. But until they're folded, they don't do that. And I was like, oh my God, that's like totally interesting. And I thought there was also an analogy to my sculpture, because when I make these sculptures in the computer, I start with a line that's actually non-dimensional. And I have to give it a dimension. And then, as I give it a dimension and start filling things out, then it becomes a sculpture. And then it becomes like a functional sculpture. So that was sort of an interesting analogy. That is aluminum. Sorry, a lot of times I forget to mention that stuff. It's aluminum structure with dichroic film on plexi. So it's kind of a sandwich. So there's like aluminum welded structure, and then there's like plexi on both sides with this film on it. I have a video of this too. I don't know if this has sound. It does. This video is a little long, but sorry about that. Sorry about that. I think it's, I made that like a few years ago, and I really think our idea about like how long a video should be has changed. So I've got to edit it down a little bit. But that's it. Thank you. Should I?
Thank you so much for such
sure.
a fantastic talk. And I think we got a glimpse of your inventiveness and your originality. Much of my own work is in gravitational lensing, which is sort of chasing light rays through the universe. I have to say, it seems much more banal working with equations and trying to visualize.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Anyway, I think we are open for questions, so please feel free to ask questions. I think Ty has a mic.
Should I?
You may want to keep the slide.
Your
ready.
work is
Okay.
extraordinary, Alyson. It
Thank
blew
you.
me away. I'm interested in, from afar and with the change of light, is one iteration. But when you get up close, it's a total different sensibility
Yeah.
and equally as beautiful.
Thank you.
I've been wondering if you ever considered, and maybe one of those pieces might have been, going inside.
Like the ability for a person to go inside?
To go inside, yes.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
have that feeling. If you want to identify with it from a distance and then up close, you kind of want to get into it too.
Yeah, I mean, in the shape of space, that piece that was at the Guggenheim, you could get really close to it, and you could be inside those curves. There are certain pieces that, like the invariant interval pieces, that expansion piece, it was very cool to be inside, but some of the problems with that are just like a crowd issue, typically. Then you get people, you'd be surprised what people do. So you think, oh yeah, this will be okay. And then before you know it, people are like climbing something, or who knows what. But I agree with you, and actually I thank you for saying that, because I think that it's really intentional on my part to make things interesting close up and far away, or just at various distances, so that they seem almost different. So sometimes some of them, you think it's one thing from far away, and close up it becomes something completely a different object. Thank you.
Do you think, or has your work evolved to think differently about the human form and these other kinds of gravitational or mathematical forms, or do you see them as entirely continuous? And how do you think about consciousness in relation to that question? Just a little small.
Small, yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how to define consciousness. I think of the human form, I don't tend to depict the human form very often. So usually the human form, like this is the only time, and the work that I'm doing right now is the echo of a human form in a sense, because I'm taking something and manipulating it a lot. So it's what I've done to it. And so maybe in there's like an echo. And in terms of, consciousness and space and our place in the universe, I don't know. But I'll say one thing. I don't even know if this relates, but I was talking to a friend last night, actually the curator who invited me to do the artist in residency here at Yale. And I was saying that I oftentimes don't leave my studio very often, and I can get very wrapped up in there. And because I feel like I can go anywhere there, I can travel the universe there, and I don't need to drag my body somewhere else, although I do, often do that. But, I feel like through your mind you can travel wherever you want, and well, maybe that's an answer. That's such a big question.
I was wondering about the pieces that are outside over time. And you also talked about the light, how it changes over the course of a day. So the pieces outside will eventually become maybe full of algae and green stuff. And so is that something that you would encourage, or?
They won't do that only because they have such care given to them. So at Storm King, they preserve all their sculptures. And interestingly to me, which I never knew, there's some giant Calder sculptures there that are black and some red ones, painted metal. They're very beautiful. But I thought, those are so easy to take care of. No, apparently those need to be repainted like every couple of years, fully repainted. So anything outdoors needs to be maintained, and probably they would get algae and all that stuff if they were just sitting somewhere not being taken care of. But the one at Storm King, the one in the curvy one is in a private collection, and he's really meticulous about keeping it in good shape, which is wonderful. Then I have some other works here and there. Yeah, they're also made of things that don't, necessarily deteriorate that much. So like the glass is actually holding up really well, and the stainless steel holds up pretty well with care.
A natural way to connect dimensions is through optical caustics. Have you?
Know what that is.
Do you know what that is?
No.
So when the surface of a pool is rippling, but on the bottom of the pool you see sharp, intense light, and that light bounces around because of the way in which the surface reflects the light. So it connects the topography of the surface to the plane, and it evolves. So it's something that is akin to the piece that you had in Japan, but it also is like the wrinkles that you also.
That's so interesting. As you call it, optical caustics.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna write that down. Anybody else? Yes.
So much of your work is based on the perspective of the observer, and it makes sense because we're living in a post-Einsteinian age of relativity. But there's, as the initial question showed, when there's at once there's emptiness for the same volume, sort of without mass. There is something fixed point in space, but also that changes over time. So given that it changes so much from the perspective of the observer, I was wondering how the art has had different receptions among different observers. You mentioned there was a bit of it, the different reception in Tokyo. I'd be curious how across different cultures or different spaces in geography, it's been this sort of people have interacted with your work differently.
There is a cultural difference, strangely. I've been showing a lot in Sweden, and somebody said to me, "Oh, they love your work in Sweden," because they love light, and they really think about light all the time. It gets dark half the year, and I don't know if they love my work in Sweden or not, but I do feel like there's like an understanding of it there. There is definitely. Like everybody does seem to appreciate light and what it does. So I have noticed that. It's here, there's a lot of selfie taking. And so maybe it's a very narcissistic society, or not maybe, we know it's a narcissistic society. But yeah, everybody reacts differently, and one of my concerns going forward is that people will become so absorbed in their phones and have such short attention spans that nobody's going to take the time to really experience something over time. And I really want my sculptures to be like that. For instance, that piece, the curvy fence piece, I installed it. It was a boiling hot day. In fact, I think I got like blisters. It was like so hot. And it was just miserable. And then he had also put down this fertilizer that had like fish smell, and all these little bugs were coming out and biting me. And I was like, wow, this is miserable. So I just got out of there as soon as possible once we were done. And then I didn't go back for a long time, and then I had to get photographs of it, so this couple, family really, invited me to stay overnight because we wanted to take pictures at sunset and sunrise, and so I got to see this work that I made from afternoon into nighttime, waking up at 5 a.m., seeing it at sunrise, and I was like, oh my God, this is really amazing, and amazing in a way that I wouldn't have experienced had I not spent that time with it. So anyway, just culturally, I hope that people won't lose that idea. I do worry about that, though. But I guess it's nothing to do.
Thanks so much for that. So I was really interested in this through line through much of your work, where it's almost like you preserve the gravitational effects at a single point in time. And even sometimes, like with the piece outside next to the tree, it's the illusion of the gravitational effects almost because you're supporting it. Whereas you totally delight in the way that the natural light changes and animates the piece. So I was curious to what extent you've thought about your pieces showing the effect of gravity over a duration.
I haven't thought of it that much. They do that anyway, but in a very subtle way or slow way. So some of the pieces are attached to whatever, ceiling or walls or whatever, or through, what do you call that, monofilament. And so they definitely sag, depending on what I use. So they do sag over time. But it's an interesting idea, and I mean, it would be an interesting challenge to show somehow in a way that would be interesting to show that, you know. But the gravity is constant, like the force is sort of constant, so it's not changing. So it kind of, yeah, I'm not sure how to do that, but it's an interesting idea.
So I'll do it without the mic. So we heard, we didn't hear all that much. I mean, this is a very specific imposing of a question. I'm sorry, I apologize in advance. We didn't hear that much in your presentation about the actual making of any one of these things, the process from start to finish.
Yeah.
I would love to hear about two of them in particular, and just for you to lead us through the steps. One would be Threefold, and the other would be one of the bronzes that you showed us from the series of bronzes. Could you do that?
Well, Threefold is that was, at this point, I guess it's not, it's still probably one of the most complicated sculptures I've ever made. So that started by taking a shape in the computer, just a tube, essentially, stretching it, kind of twisting it 3 different ways to create those shapes. That tubular shape in the computer, I mean, really the thread drawings and those sculptures are made the same way, in a weird way. So they start the same and they have 2 different outcomes. So I have this kind of linear shape in the computer, and when I started making these, I was like, I love this linear shape. I want this to be the sculpture. So then it was expanding out those lines as I was talking about and making them dimensional. And then you got, these sort of planar forms, and then you've got to make all these build drawings to build that. So then it's like dividing it up into the metal parts and the plexi parts and numbering and lettering each and every part. And then we get the metal laser cut, usually laser cut, sometimes water jet, and the plexi laser cut, maybe a million zillion pieces. It's like a giant 3-dimensional mosaic. And that one we had everything like lettered and numbered and whatever. And then it gets welded up in parts. So there were the 3 big shapes, and each shape is made up of like 6 shapes that get put together because it's heavy, it has to fit through doors. There's all this like practical stuff. So that those get bolted together, and then once you've got one shape, then you rig it and lift it up and go to the next one. But the funny thing about that installation was that I think it was like really quick. It took so long to happen, so long for everybody to decide and raise the money, and then once it happened, they were like, okay, we want it like now. And so it was like maybe 6 months, but that's actually not that long, and I had never done it before. So when we got to Stanford, there were a zillion loose pieces, and we just had these piles of like loose pieces of plexi, like numbered, like, and we would just be like, does anyone have an A2? A2? And we'd be like finding the A2, put it down. It was really like insane, but somehow, you know, we did that. It was crazy. But that's how those get made. The bronzes are made just like the clay pieces. So, you know, tube, or I make a slab, and I have to make the slab really nice and perfect. And I don't know what the word for that is. All of a sudden I can't remember it, but you know, you get it so the fibers are all, like you smooth it down a lot so the fibers are all connecting. And then I drop it, and then it's a different type of clay for the bronze. So that is a waxy clay that they can then burn out. And I don't actually do this stuff. I don't really know how to do bronze fabrication. So I have it fabricated somewhere else. But they make the mold. They burn out the wax clay, and then they pour bronze into there, and then polish it. Well, you know, it's like I'm sure there's a few steps in there. And I think they make those in parts too, actually. I thought they made them all in one part, but then I saw some picture and I was like, oh my God, you guys weld these and then polish them. Yeah, it's quite the job, I think. But,
Thank you.
yeah.
Okay, so just like in the second case, just like so many old bronze monuments, it's kind of a lost wax process.
Right, it's exactly that. Yeah, the bronze hasn't changed, really. Yeah.
I would love to see this in person. Do you have anything in the Northeast that we can drive to go and see?
I have the piece at Storm King. Yeah.
Where is that? I'm sorry.
It's in Mountainville, New York, which is about an hour and a half out of the city. I'm not sure. From here, it's probably pretty close. I don't know. An hour, maybe. And I believe they're still open. They closed for the winter, but I don't know when. I bet they're still open. So, yeah, that's there.
I read about it online that the first half of October is the most popular.
Because of leaves. Yeah. There was that picture.
Yeah, with the fall colors.
Yeah. I'll have to find that. Yeah, this is my own picture that I took.
Stunning. So, Alyson,
Yes.
if I may, I have a question about your creative process. So, it's really beautiful the way in which you are trying to capture space, time, light, all these things that are sort of constantly moving, in a way, are sort of carrying motion, right? And so, how do you decide in your creative process when you're done with a piece? Because it seems like, you know, you could keep going and shaping it further and further. So what is the process? Do you start out with an initial conception of what you really want and you go there? It doesn't quite sound like it. It sounds like you organically let the material lead you there, right?
Yeah.
But when do you know you're done?
It's like an elusive question, really, because actually I was just at a talk last night of an artist completely different than me, Peter Saul. Somebody asked him the same question, and I was like, what is he going to say? And he really had the same answer I do, which is like, you know, you kind of, sometimes you just say like, yes, this is it. Sometimes you feel like, well, maybe I could go farther. And then I guess sometimes if I feel I can go farther, then maybe I make another piece. If I feel this one's kind of resolving itself, maybe it means I just need to explore more in that, you know, same material or whatever it is. So like, for instance, like Object for Reflection, I had made, that was the piece that was the metal, saggy piece.
This is the one that I saw in Philadelphia, right?
Yes. But then I made the one in New York. It's different, actually. They're different. And so there I felt like, well, yeah, it was good, but I felt like I could go further. And yeah, so sometimes it's just very obvious when I'm done. And sometimes, but anyway, I don't have well, in this case, I had to have you know, something like this where it's like you've got to build it and get everything cut and whatever. You've got to have a preconceived notion. But in many of those other pieces, I just keep working on it. Now, for instance, like the piece at Louis Vuitton in Tokyo, I couldn't fit that in my studio. That happens often. And even that big invariant interval piece, there was no way I could fit that in my studio. So I made part of it pray to God that it works, you know, in the space. And, you know, think of it in my mind and make all the parts and then install it. And with Invariant Interval, which was at UT Austin, it actually was challenging. It was really challenging. It was challenging in a way, well, you know, in terms of the material. So, like, suddenly you realize, oh, this is light when it's, you know, this amount of material, but once it's this other amount of material, it's quite heavy and starts to do this other thing and, like, just wants to stick to the ground. So that was, you know, interesting. But then you sort of learn to deal with it on a larger scale. But anyway, I'm sorry I'm not really answering that question.
Anyway, there are no further
Thank you.
questions. Let's say a big thank you to Alyson. As you probably guessed, I'm a groupie. And so hopefully
Well, I'm a
everybody
groupie.
full of groupies today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.